Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Essential Chat with Mit. And happy Social Work Month. We know that this is a time when we celebrate each other. And so we thought we would use this Essential Chat as a time to talk about something a little bit different, but still on a serious note. First, I would like to say to all of you that I believe in living presentations. So I do just want us to take a moment and think about what's going on in Ukraine right now. I have a few social work colleagues that are in Kiev. I have some that are at the border of Poland, making sure that the 3 million people who are now refugees can find safe harbor. A lot of them leaving their fathers and not knowing and thinking about, if you know anything about refugees, which is different from immigrants, so look up that terminology. But a refugee leaves their land forcibly because of war. And of course, every refugee has in their heart they want to go back. But as we look at the refugees in Ukraine, we have to demand that the policies that are created to let Ukrainians into this country actually let all refugees into this country, because we have several that are sitting at that border for a couple of years trying to get into the United States. So we can't put the lens of race or countries onto refugees, but I do stand in solidarity with Ukraine. My social work friend in Kyiv says that, the Russians don't even believe that there is a war. And so a war is going on. And we should recognize that and know that social workers, just like with COVID, are at the front lines. So I just hate to continue business knowing that things are going on. So this show is about intergenerational social work. And so we want you to put in the chat, number one, where you come from, number two, who influenced you to be a social worker. When you think about it, who influenced you, April Scott, to join this profession? And I always start my essential chats with a song. And I met Marla Blunt Carter. Oh, I don't even know how I met Marla Blunt Carter, because it seems like she was in my life. But one of the good things about Marla is her first name. My girlfriend, when I was a little child, was named Marla. So when I heard Marla Blunt Carter, I'm like, I know we're going to be friends, and surely we are. And when I always met her, she always talked about our family. So I'm going to just dedicate this to we are family. I got my sisters with me because she has some sisters, and you're going to hear about them, I'm sure. We are family. Get up, everybody, and sing. Now, when I met Marla, she always would say, and my dad, my dad, my dad. And I'm like, wow, she talks about her dad. And she just loves him. And we all love our dads. But it was talking about her dad as it related to the social work profession. And then I learned that her dad was a social worker. And Marla invited me down to her hometown in Wilmington for dinner. And her dad came over and joined us. Now, I have to tell you this, he didn't have anything. I don't even think he had dessert, but he paid the bill. So we really do like you, the fact that he came over and joined us, right? But he started talking about his role as a social worker. So I'm going to introduce you to Marla Blunt Carter, who also teaches at Rutgers University, who has been very involved politically, and she'll tell you her own story, but she is connected to everyone. She understands policy, she understands the role of a social worker in policy. But what we're going to talk about today, Marla, is who gave you that passion. I know for me, that passion came from two people. One, my mom. My mom wasn't a social worker, but we lived in Kennett Square, which is not too far from where you live. And my mother would just take in kids. And she would never, ever take in kids from the child welfare system. It was always someone that ran on at hard times. And she would say, oh, your child can stay with us. And so I have a lot of foster brothers and sisters, but we don't call ourselves foster brothers and sisters because they didn't come through the system. But I also was a my mother made me try to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. So she made me become a candy striper at a hospital. And I knew that I did not want to be a nurse. But I happened to see this woman one day come in and just direct things. And her name was Janet Robinson, and she was the hospital social worker. She never knew to this day, and I have to try to find her, that she influenced my life. But with you, it was a little bit different. You have real live layers. So, Marla, introduce yourself to our listening audience, and then we'll get your dad in.
Well, I just want to say how great it is to be on this Facebook Live with both you, Mitt, and with Dad. Mitt, we met through NASW President of the Delaware chapter. She introduced us, Jennifer Thompson, because she just thought that we had to connect, and we met. Our first meeting, we started to talk about bringing all of social workers around the country together and to create a an event where we could interact with the White House so that we could put social workers at the table. And so that's been my focus, both academically and professionally and personally. And that's because of my dad. So my dad brought me into social work at a very young age. And he didn't bring me into the profession like you're going to be a social worker, but he inspired me early on. You know, I'm one of three girls. We were born in Philadelphia, relocated to Delaware in the 70s, at a time when, civil rights, women's rights, all of that, you know, um, social change was happening. And dad had just graduated from Rutgers with a master's degree in social work. I didn't know that he was a social worker because he did everything. He was in the community, he was an educator, he was an organizer, and he just really cared about people. And I love that about him, that he was able to fit in anywhere. He could talk to anybody and he could make things happen. And I wanted to be like that. So the song that I think of when I think of my dad is a Stevie Wonder song, which is Do Like You, because I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to help people. I wanted to um, feel like my purpose on this earth was to help others. And Dad often quotes Marion Wright Edelman, and I'm sure he'll talk about it, but he always talks about that service is the rent we pay, for living, for being here. And that was the beginning for me, was just watching him. My first political campaign was 1976. I was doing lit drops at 9 years old, knocking on doors, meeting people, trying to get out the vote. And I'm still doing that today. Although I teach at Rutgers, I teach management and policy, um, but I'm really focused on doing the work. So I also am engaged in political campaigns. I help people run for office. I do candidate development and leadership development because I want to make sure that there's a bench, that we continue to put people out here in the world that really care about social issues and really want to help people. And I want to see social workers in these spaces. So that's why I went to teach, because I felt like I couldn't do it by myself. I wanted to see more social workers at the table, more social workers running for office, more social workers influencing policy. And that's what I'm teaching now. I'm teaching a mini political social work class this semester. And I think we need to be there. I think, you started this talking about Ukraine and policies. There are human rights issues, global issues, and we are best suited because of our code of ethics to help to shape policy. And so, I think that we need to be in these spaces, and that's what I feel is my call. It is the political side of me and the social work side of me coming together in the academic spaces so that I can build up an army. That's my hope and desire. And I learned all of that from that man right there, from my dad.
And I
Superhero.
do, I do want to give you kudos, Marla, because NASW had its first White House engagement due to you, Marla Blunt Carter.
Thank you.
And you actually pulled that off and got us in and had the meeting with uh, uh, the Honorable Cedric Richmond and navigated. And I want to give that because you stayed in the background on all of that. And that was the first time that NASW was inside and talked with the White House staff. So
Thank you, Matt.
why don't you kind of introduce that person that has us all sitting around here, right?
Yeah, so my dad, the Honorable Theodore Blunt, I'll let him read his bio. But I was just sitting here and I wrote a list of all of the things that I used to think of that he did, and and then I began to teach social work, and it was in the textbook, all of the things that social workers can do, and they were all my dad.
Mhm.
So there was an education administrator, an organizer, an elected official, an advocate, a planner, a teacher, an activist, a community leader. Dad organized the parents in the schools. He helped the guidance counselors and the librarians. He was in charge of that. All federal programs in all of the schools, all of the funding, the federal funding. But he also ran for office. And more importantly, he raised 3 successful daughters
Mhm.
because he never left us out. We were
Right.
always a part of everything that he did. My oldest sister is a congresswoman now, Delaware's first female and first woman of color ever to represent the state of Delaware in Congress. And we only have one member, and that is Lisa Blunt Rochester, my older sister. And then my middle sister is an engineer, and she works in nuclear power in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's my sister, Thea Fowler. And then there's me, the baby of the bunch, rebel rouser, troublemaker, social worker, and every bit mini Ted Blunt. So my dad and my mom married 61 years. They really did the work. Thanks, Dad. The floor is yours, man.
Thank you. Let's just say I did not start out wanting to be a social worker or even thinking about the field of social work. I only started out wanting to be able to help others. And my first inkling of social work started growing up in Philadelphia, living in the James Weldon housing projects, and observing a social work type person showing us where to get welfare cheese and where to get medical assistance and how to sign up to go to the appropriate public school in the immediate area. That was the model. I just saw a person that was there, that was friendly, that engaged in the community, and that was there and willing to help. I got the opportunity to go to graduate school when I worked at crime prevention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was a juvenile gang worker, and the opportunity presented for me to go to graduate school, but I had to compete against another worker, and we had to take an exam. And I was fortunate enough to have scored higher than he scored on the exam. And then the agency said that we will pay for you to go to school, which allowed me the opportunity to go to graduate school and also have the dollars to make it possible for my wife, 2 children, and at that particular time, Marla was still in the oven because she did not come out until 2 months after I had entered graduate school. And that was Rutgers University. And that was 52 years ago. And from just that beginning, I was able to start out as a social worker working at Temple University in Philadelphia. And then I moved on to a community agency, People's Settlement Association in Wilmington, Delaware, as a program director and executive director. Moved on from there as an independent consultant because social workers can do many more things than we even thought of even imagining. You didn't have to be a social worker or a group worker or community organizer. You could blend all 3 of those things. by being a consultant, working with a housing authority agency like I did, helping to start the Delaware Agency for Specialized Transportation in Delaware like I did, serving as the chairman of the board of trustees at my college, which was Winston-Salem State University, and then moving on to do other things. But the field of education was the one that I ultimately ended up serving for 36 years as an administrative director, handling federal funds, handling special education services, and also creating a volunteer program where we started with 12 volunteers and we let it grow to 1,200 volunteers. That by itself just demonstrated the value of a social worker, being able to interact with individuals on a one-on-one basis, handle them in group settings, and then to build an organization that was bigger than anyone could ever imagine. Meanwhile, I thought about politics because from a policy, you need to be able to create a law. Policies can go forward, but it's being able to create laws that make that policy stay around a lot longer. And I served on city council for 24 years as the neighborhood elected official, which is the neighborhood city councilman, as well as the president of city council for a city of 80,000 people. By being in that position, I was able to create a scholarship fund by earmarking $100,000 a year for 8 years for individuals to go to college that resided in the city of Wilmington, Delaware. I also created a special fund for individual schools at the elementary level to receive $20,000 apiece to come up with programs that would be beneficial to the kids and their parents and the staff at those particular schools. So my journey has been good, it's been lasting, and I'm just glad to be here to watch people like my daughter Marla, but also my granddaughter that also has a master's degree, and she also attended Rutgers University. That also makes us proud. But I came from a family with no one going to college, to 3 daughters going to college, to 4 grandchildren going to college, and now the 5th getting ready to enter college in September. So I'm very fortunate to say it's not about me, it's what I've been able to produce after me.
Ubuntu, right? We are because who we are, right? That is great. I could listen all day to these stories because it is something that resonates with me that social workers often forget the all of the things that we can do. You don't have to you don't have to have a social work job to do social work, right? And that's what's important. Now I know all of you may not know this, but the Blunts are some heavy powerful people in Wilmington, Delaware. When you go to a restaurant with the Blunts, expect everybody to come over to your table and tell you how, who, what, where, how their business is going. Marla is not a person to toot her own horn, but when President Biden was a senator, Marla worked in his office, right? She was there, helped to make sure the constituents received what they needed to receive. And Mr. Blunt was one of those that went into the community to raise funds for that to happen. For Senator Biden to become a senator, and I'm sure he had a lot of influence for him to be there and the president of the United States. So these are some individuals that as we would say in the African American culture, some high cotton, right? They are they are some high cotton that you need to know. And I say that because, as you heard, Mr. Blunt, who came from humble beginnings, but always gave back to the
Yeah,
community.
and Matt, I think what made the impact on me the most is that Dad always kept North Philly in us.
Mhm.
Like, you may think you high cotton,
Right.
but let me remind you that you are like everyone else,
Mhm.
no better.
Mhm.
And we have work to do. And I think it's the same with a lot of families that are families of service. You're not in it for the accolades, or like you said before, I didn't want the credit
Mhm.
for making the White House briefing happen. I just wanted it to happen. And I wanted the White House to be aware that there are over 700,000 social workers that are ready and skilled and able to help. And
Mhm.
so Dad was the one who taught me that it's not about you. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, just get the work done. And I don't know. I think that is I think that that's important. I think that's an important quality about humility. But I think another one, to Dad's point about all of the different ways that he did social work, is the versatility of the degree and the ability of the social worker to adapt.
Mhm.
We take our skills with us, we take our code of ethics with us, and that's what makes us so powerful in these spaces.
Mhm.
When I applied to work in Senator Biden's office at that time, I was up against lawyers. There had never been a social worker to work in the position. I did not apply for the casework office. I applied as a projects manager, which means that I was responsible for doing outreach and engagement to the community on certain issues. My portfolio was education, health, and housing. And I handled that for his district office in the state of Delaware. Had I gone in there thinking that, well, a social worker doesn't do this, well, I haven't read this in the history, I mean, in our books about social worker, then I would have talked myself out of it. But when I read the job description, I said, I can do this. My degree has given me the skills to do this. And
Mhm.
Dad gave me the courage and the confidence to believe that I can do it because I was trained to do it and because I saw him do it. And I think that that's the thing that's most important, even about today. What you're doing is showing people, giving them an example of the possibility
Mhm.
of what you can do. Dad spoke about Alyssa, his granddaughter, my niece. She is working right now for an education publishing company, not a human services organization. She's in education publishing. She creates content for this company. She's the vice president of this company, and graduating from Rutgers. So all three of us went to
Oh, wow.
Winston-Salem State, and then all three of us went to Rutgers. So it's
Mhm.
actually three social workers in our families that have
Wow.
followed in the same path. But we've also done it in very unorthodox ways and doing jobs that aren't in the list of social work jobs, but
Mhm.
they are things that we are excited about and we can make a difference. So I would hope that those that are listening would understand that you're only as limited as your vision, because that's what Dad showed me all the time. Everywhere he went, he was like the only one. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like, I can do it too. He did it.
I,
So
I think I
So,
think I
so
think
Mr. Blunt, and I'm going to ask everybody to put some questions in because again, this is like being at my kitchen table. If and pretty soon we'll be able to do that. Masks are off now. I'll be able to just invite people, and we can have food and sit and chit chat with some wine and have some fun. But what would you say to I was on a call today and social workers were talking about, we got to get out people to vote. And I'm like, young people have always voted. There was a Mississippi Summer Project. There were all of these things. Young people have always been involved. Don't make them feel guilty about their, of course, we need more people to get out to vote, but let's just not put this on the back of young
mhm,
people. As a young person, who's been involved in the civil rights years, who probably lived through some of the segregated issues. I was from Kennett Square, and we could only go to the movies and sit to the left side. What would you say to a young person today about staying in the room to bring about change rather than leaving the room? So many social workers does, I can't do. I'm giving up, right? I'm going to give up
mhm.
on this. Let's just tear down and do all this. What would you say to them?
well, I think it starts out by those today wanting and needing to build individual relationships with key policymakers, key programmers, key elected officials, and starting in their own communities. Aside from what you do on your job, what are you doing at home? What are you doing with your family? Are you involved with them? Do you go to the school with them? Are you involved with the PTA? Do you show up at the sporting events? Start with yourself. And then you can broaden that because you're going to encounter a lot of other people. 2, take advantage of the various media platforms that exist today that did not exist 52 years ago when I started. There are many more ways that we can collaborate and come in contact with one another. The third point is that social workers today are totally different than the face of social workers 52 years ago. There's much more diversity today in terms of those that are in the field of social work than there was 52 years ago, believe me. We were not visible. We did not hold leadership in the key organizations that advocate for social workers around the country. We were not even in the room. And so for me, the most important thing is find a way to get in the room. Because if you're in the room, you can make a difference. But you need to start out by listening. That's why you have one mouth and 2 ears. You
Heard
need
that a
to
lot.
listen first. Because so often we speak without the knowledge base that's absolutely essential to bring about a change. Learn and know your adversaries as well as your friends. And don't be afraid to cross the line to be with the other side every now and then. Because if you're the same as everybody else, you're going to be treated the same as everybody else. You want to be treated differently. You want to be recognized because of what you know, but also who you know.
Yeah.
So I just encourage those that are involved now to continue to be involved. We talked about getting young people involved. When I first ran for office for a city council seat, the total number of votes in a primary to win it was 204 votes. When I ran for that seat 4 years later, we brought out close to 2,000 people. You see the difference? But it started with engagement. It started with understanding people. It started with visiting the communities. It started with not thinking you're bigger, better than anybody else. But you got to listen to those at the bottom if you expect to reach the top of the ladder. But even when you reach the top, the ladder also can let you back down. So you need to stay connected to people. And most importantly, you need to be honest. Just tell the truth. So often, we want to fib around. A lie is a lie no matter where you go. My mother once told me, you know what? You can tell a lie and it takes 10 minutes to get around the world. Tell the truth, it takes 2 years.
Right.
It happened.
You know,
So often, we tend to accuse people without being able to verify. First, verify, then vilify if necessary.
yeah.
We vilify first, and then we verify.
Yeah.
Don't mark Joe Biden because of one or two things. Look at the total package over time. You got an honest man versus a previous dishonest man. There's your mark. Don't talk about all the things that he's not doing. Talk about the things that he is doing. And so often, we want to talk in the back room. Well, if you want to stand up, stand up.
Thank you.
So Mitt, I was going to say, and that's why my social work degree made sense, because all of that wisdom, that's our 6 core principles.
Exactly.
That is integrity.
Right.
That is dignity and worth of a person. That is the importance of human relationships. That is service. That is social justice. And that is competence. Because Dad said you got to know your stuff.
Right.
And so and that's how it's funny, because students ask me, how did you memorize those 6 core principles so easily? I lived it watching him. integrity means don't lie.
Right.
Don't lie, you know? And so who we are as individuals, we're made up of the wisdom and the knowledge and experiences and problems and missteps of the generations before. And I think that having this conversation, this intergenerational social work, there is so much value in having that conversation between generations.
Hmm.
Dad understands that he doesn't know social media. He ain't tweeting, but he knows that his grandkids know how to do whatever. And he'll say, "Hey, Hannah, show me that TikTok thing," because he cares. He's interested in the next generation. But I wanted to just share with you, what I said to my students, that don't believe the hype that young people are not engaged.
Hmm.
In this last election, the young people voted more than they have ever voted in the history of elections.
Hmm.
They were the highest demographic to turn out. So this generation is the most engaged, civically engaged, the most informed because of their access to information. And I think even more passionate than we were and those before us, because what they are facing, the existential threat based on the environment. We're
Hmm.
finally seeing racial and social justice, issues being raised. Shoot, they're tearing down statues that we thought were going to be standing for forever. So I would just tell them to keep doing what you're doing and call us
Hmm.
when you need us. Because
Exactly, exactly. I think that whole thing on intergeneration building on, I sit in this chair at NASW on the shoulders of Whitney Young.
yeah.
And Whitney Young advised President Nixon, Carter, and Kennedy. Whitney Young, you talk about threats that came
Yes.
into Whitney Young, right? I may have had some threats, Twitter threats, but I have not had the threats like Whitney Young. And I think it's so important to always remember social work legacy, Ida B. Wells. I mean, if you really kind of go and really
Hey.
look at who the social workers were, we were there. Dorothy Height, so many people, Jane Addams, that use their time and their energy to change systems. One thing that I'm going to ask you, because I often talk about the dignity and respect, and I engage in Twitter. I do a little bit of Instagram. In fact, I hate it because sometimes I think I'm turning on the camera and I don't mean it for the camera to be on. I'm sitting there, and I don't want to be on. I just want to look at my daughter's picture of my grandson. But I say to social workers, do not become like the oppressor, right? So when you tweet, you have to do it in a way that has dignity and respect. I
Mhm,
don't care about controversy, but
mhm,
you can't say F you, right? I mean,
yeah,
I just don't engage with stuff like that. And I'm
right.
trying to, and it's not because, you know, I'm not because I'm old school, but I am old school. If my mother walked in here, I wouldn't curse, because we weren't allowed to do that in front of our parents. My grandson might say a word or two because he's listening to all that thing, but he knows not to ever curse at me, right? There's just
Mhm,
certain family values. So, what do we say to social workers? Because your father said this, and Ted, you can answer this also. Is that people are watching, right?
mhm,
People are watching us as the social work profession, and there have been a couple of cases where social workers get on Twitter or Facebook and they say some horrific things, and then they wonder why they can't get a job.
mm,
Right, so what do you say to your students in understanding that your handle is going to be with you for the rest of your life?
mhm. Yeah, I know for me, okay, so it's funny. Right now I'm teaching organizing, and there's a contrast between Saul Alinsky, disrupt and agitate, and then Paulo Freire, which
Mhm.
is about consensus building, collaboration, really active listening. And I tell them there's a time and a place for both of them, and it does take, you have to have good judgment, and knowing when to act in a way that you can't build on it.
Mhm.
So I'm very much about collaboration, about finding a way to work with people. so that I can continue to build and grow. If you go on Twitter and you cuss somebody out or you blow something up, ain't no coming back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so you have to use good judgment and figure out when is what is my course of action here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, step back, reflect, and then plan. We are social workers, we plan, right? Whatever we do,
Right.
any kind of intervention, I don't care if it's a person, a community, or a policy. What's the problem? What's the plan?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, if the plan doesn't show that you can continue to build and grow to lead to further change, then it's time to change the plan.
Right.
Dad?
Now, yeah. Now, Dad, we back in the day, we'd have to take a typewriter out and send a message, right? So we were able to do a lot of these planning. So, what advice do you give your grandchildren as they respond to an issue on Twitter or what is that, Snapchat or whatever?
Well, I try not to give advice as much as I try to listen to what they're saying, because there could be two messages in a statement. One message could be let's go, the other could be let's not go. But if one does not have the patience or the time to first listen, one is not going to understand the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so I first suggest to them, when their approach, to always listen before they make a decision. And secondly, you don't have to be perfect to try.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
often
like that.
we're afraid of not trying because we're not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
When in essence, if you don't try, that's like a failure. So I always suggest, if in doubt, you can always try to see whether or not it's the right thing for you. And then you have to alter it depending upon the situation. And then the third thing is, most older folks are afraid, or even middle-aged folks, to engage with young people.
Mm-hmm.
Just go sit down in the park. They'll come to you. I can tell you that for sure. I mean, for whatever the reason, my daughter Marla once said, I think like a kid. And if you think like a kid, you enjoy yourself. Think like an old person, you're going to die.
Exactly.
But think like a kid. Think when you were young. Think of your experiences. Think of your setbacks. And think of who was there when you needed them the most.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, whether I'm working with babies, middle-aged folks, seniors, I try to put myself in the mindset of thinking like them,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like them, wanting the same things that they want. And if I
Well,
can't
yeah.
do that, I'm in the wrong room.
Yeah.
Well, Pamela Scott said, "I'm so thankful for all these nuggets. Feel free to ask some questions because I know this is like a bedtime story. Where you just hear and you just keep on going." Um, Here is Carissa. Have you been taught about social work leaders in history that were of color in any of your studies?
Never.
Absolutely not.
But let me tell you this though, and that's another reason why I went into education, and I'm sure Mitt can speak to this as well. Just like I felt it was my responsibility to train other social workers how to do policy and politics, I also felt it was necessary for me to bring our experiences of social work into academia. And this I often bring in people that aren't really thought of, but they're icons and role models to us. In one of my classes, I brought up Dolores Huerta, who is a community organizer and a feminist, strong woman that many people did not know. And when I told her story and showed a video about her, as a matter of fact, she was the woman who coined the phrase "Yes, we can"
Mm-hmm.
for Barack Obama. Si se puede, as she was organizing the United Farm Workers in California
Mm-hmm.
in the 70s. But when I shared her story in class, a Chicano student, she stayed after and she cried on Zoom with me saying, I have never seen myself ever she's in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Representation matters. And so, no, they're not mainstreamed in our education, but it is our responsibility, each and every one of us, first to research, but then to educate others. Mitt she rambled off 4 names off the top of her, she uh, Whitney Young, Ida B. Wells, Dolores Height. There are so many.
Right.
And there are a lot of people that did not necessarily get the social work degree, but have been in their history books doing social work,
Mm-hmm.
because truthfully, they weren't able to be in these social work programs. I mean,
Right.
those settlement houses, we weren't even able to go into college when Jane Addams was setting up the settlement
Mm-hmm.
houses. Some of our HBCUs were founded around the same time that was happening. So I think a lot of it has to do, the history is the stories that we need to tell, because nobody else is going to tell our stories.
I was on a call previous to this one on Afrofuturism, which was a new title, and I'm kind of doing this futurist project out in Portland, Oregon. And really what it is, it's all about history. Now, we have something in common. All of us went to HBCUs undergrad. And I am so thankful for that experience, because here in Chester County, I first went to Catholic school, then I went to public school, but I didn't even want to go to college because I didn't think that could happen. And I went off to Central State University. And the first course I took was called Nigritude, right? Nigritude.
What?
And it was nothing but a reading list by people of color, right? So I started reading Booker T. Washington. I started reading the souls of Black folks. These were things that I didn't even know. And with everything in me, my back started getting strong, right? And I realized how many Black PhD people there were. I didn't realize that the fork that you use, the refrigerator, that the clock that you look at, that the heart, Dr. Haleway, I didn't know any of that. And so with that, I am concerned about something right now. I am concerned that social workers are not showing up at those school board meetings. Ted, you talked about that earlier. That we're remaining silent. I tend to think that every school of social work, if you look, there's one in every community, that they should put on their course outline, attend the school board meetings, because taking out a lot of the curriculum and also starting to censor the books, or even the thought, as I said at one of our school board meetings, like, well, we don't want kids to feel in pain when they understand, that I here live on Lenape land, and that there were Native Americans from the Lenape tribe and the Nanaco tribe down there where you live in Millsboro, Delaware. Well, we don't want our kids to feel bad. But I'm like, but what about our kids, right? There's that song again, with Jennifer Hudson, but what about me, right? So what do you say to Ted if you had the opportunity to be sitting at Rutgers talking to 5,000 graduates, which you had the opportunity, right? We'll just keep that little joke to ourselves. But what would you say about social workers making sure that social work's not an assignment where you got to wait for somebody to tell you, but when you see people attacking people at the school board, what would you say to your BSW and MSW students?
Well, the first thought that come to my mind is the best way to keep a secret is to put it in a book. And we need to read more about what we have done. And let's not depend on other people to find it for us. Let's go find it ourselves. And so often we're not readers. So therefore we're not familiar with our history. When I attended Rutgers in 1966, the name Paul Robeson had not been mentioned for 50 years. The first All-American at Rutgers University, the first Rhodes Scholar at Rutgers University. So you can imagine here there was an activist, a social activist that was renowned throughout the world. and yet and still Rutgers could erase them. That's sort of like, Moses in the Bible. Let's erase all traces of Moses. Well, you can't, because it's already been done. And if it's not in writing, it's the word that gets around. Historically, we used to be social storytellers. When the old parents used to come together, they used to tell the stories about people before them. Just like with my children, they learned about my family and the people before me and my mother. We need to keep telling those stories, so at least they'll have a memory bank of things that happened before, and especially the accomplishments. But we should also not be afraid to talk about our failures, because if you want to be successful, you have to know where you messed up. And a lot of times we don't want to talk about the failure. We only want to talk about the good things. So I think it's absolutely essential that we go back to talking about the failures. Now, we're fortunate. We now, on a regular basis, years ago, we have Sunday dinners as a family. So young people, meaning my youngest granddaughter, who is now 18, and my other 4 grandchildren, and my 3 daughters and their husbands, all get the opportunity to come. And everybody has an equal stake in both the meal and the conversation. You come, you better bring some food. And if you're going to sit at the table, you better participate in the conversation. And nobody can escape not being called. So often we end up in a situation in a family where somebody is always left out. Let's make sure that the one that tends not to want to participate, we encourage and or force them to participate, because it starts with the family. And from there, you can branch out to your community, you can branch out through your county, your state, and even the federal government. So it starts right there. That's our base. That's where we need to start. In terms of social workers, I'm familiar with the school system because I was once a candidate to be fired by a school board. It takes 7 board members to fire an individual. But I was smart enough to have a relationship with 4 of those no votes. And the person that tried to fire me couldn't fire me because he did not have enough votes to accomplish his goal. My goal was, in order to do a job, you also have to be willing to lose a job.
Words of wisdom, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to give this question from Silas Kelly to you, only because you're an organizer, Marla, and a lot of people want to talk about how do you raise the wage for social workers, right? Now, I also think social workers have to also be involved in raising the raise for themselves.
I was going to say that. You led right to it.
Okay.
That we put ourselves in positions where we have no power. We want them to raise wages for us. That's the problem right there. That's the reason why I'm such a strong believer in political social work. That's why, because we need to be demanding and designing systems that don't oppress us. We should not be hoping and praying and lobbying someone else when we have the ability to be that person that makes those decisions. That's number one. Number two, every job that I have ever had, I have not been underpaid for long. And that's because my work is valuable. So if your work is good, then people will pay you for it. Meaning, I came in the Biden's office as a projects assistant. Within 3 months, became a projects manager. Within 3 months after that, I was the director of constituent services and a projects manager. I was in charge of both sides of his office in less than a year. Because of my ability to make relationships in the community, my knowledge about the policies and the people, right? So I think that your work speaks for itself, just like anywhere else. Corporate America, education. If you want to make more, then you present the skills and the talents that you have and the products that you create and you contribute, then they'll see the worth. And then, usually for me, the dollars match my contribution for
I
me.
think I think
Go
the
ahead.
other thing is you need to have a structure in place if you're talking about a group. I'm a part of a group called the Delaware Retired School Personnel Association. For years, we wanted to raise our pension. And so when I became vice president, I said, it's simple. We have to have a simple message and we have to show up when it counts, which is in legislative hall. They have to see numbers. We have to have a plan, and people have to feel as if you don't do it, you're going to be penalized. If there's no penalty, there'll be no reward. But you have to be firm in terms of what you're going to do. You have to have a structure. You have to have a strategy. You have to know the key players. You have to have relationships with the people that are going to make policy and laws. Don't expect that somebody's going to do for you because it's a good thing.
Right.
If that was the case, everybody would be doing good. The reason why big money make big money is because they have a lobbyist or many lobbyists that are able to go out, sell their message, corral the appropriate people on the select committees to make sure their message is heard by the governor in that particular case, because social workers are an entity in Delaware. But if you don't show, you get no dough.
And like Dad said, and to the question as you led into it about organizing, there is power in number, right? So if as a collective, if social workers, were more engaged in advocacy, policy advocacy, and were more supportive of organizations like NASW. How are you not a member of an organization where your strength could come from and placing that pressure, like Dad was saying? If you have all of these individuals that vote, somebody that's in office, they care about their voters. If they're putting pressure on you to do something, you're more inclined to listen to them because there are a bunch of them.
Right.
I think it's a matter of understanding your membership in the social work profession, really galvanizing even on the local level, your local NASW, to figure out what is it here on the state level. Forget national politics, forget what's happening here in your state, which policies, which statutes or regulations are holding you back financially here. Do your homework. Find out, why is it that we have not seen an increase in pay for certain types of social work in our state? And who are the people in positions? Who are the state senators, state reps who could advocate for us, that we should be meeting with, that they should be the ones sponsoring it? And then you go to them and you forge a relationship so that they can be the one that can champion us in your state. But it's really starting local. We think too big, too fast. What's bothering you locally? And I think that's what Dad taught me early too, being a city councilman. That person that can, if you have a problem, they're there. It's that local level that will lead to really big change, because when something changes locally, then it can change in the state. And then when it changes in the state, that becomes the model that then leads to national law. So
Right. And I think you hit on something, Marla. A lot of times people will say, "Well, we need you to do this, we need you to do that." There's a staff, I guess, of 270 social workers who work for NASW in the 55 chapters and national office for over 100,000 individuals. So you do the math on that, right? And you see, and so when you compare yourself to law and to medicine, social work is not that old. I mean, it is a very young profession. But when you have people who graduate 1 out of 3, 4 who join your professional association, and yet those that sit back and say, no, I'm not going to join. Um, we have to carry the entire profession. So I
Yeah.
often say to people, to get on the hill, it's really nice when I sit there and tell your sister and everybody else, yeah, NASW represents 55 chapters and there's even one in your state. You get the attention,
Yes.
but when we have so many others that are outside, we have to realize that duck walk, that systems change. I'm a systems theorist, right?
Hmm.
And so it is important. I mean, for us to show up, show out, but also to be a member and also to vote. So I agree
And
with you.
also to run.
Yes, run right.
I want to see more social workers in office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's what I want.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but don't just run. Run because you've got a plan. Run because you're planning to do something. Run because you care about your community. But when you
Yes.
run with self-interest in mind,
Mm-hmm.
you tend not to win. Or you might win initially, but you won't win in the long run.
Now,
Right.
we
So
have that. We have that right now,
Yes.
where we have a social worker who ran, but constantly in supporting the legislation of Build Back Better, Voting Rights Act. Although a social worker from Arizona and a senator kind of forgot. So,
Right.
now people have said, okay, well, you need to strip her. You can't. That's Senate's not a social work job,
No.
but you sure can advocate to have somebody primary her, right? I
Yes.
mean, that's the question that we have to begin to think about, and
And
you have to, yeah,
we can also support those that are in office that
that do right,
yes. Here's
right,
$5 to Karen Bass. What
right,
about Barbara Lee?
right.
I mean, we have, and on a state and local level,
Hmm.
they're in office. We need to keep them in office, but we also need to work for those in office.
Hmm.
We need to get on their staffs as well.
I
So
think
So,
Judith,
I think I think
Ju-
it's important now that there are members in both the House and the Senate that might be social workers, for you to recognize them. You have a platform to honor them, and other people see them being honored by your association.
mhm,
That puts footing for you in the door. You have
exactly.
no footing right now. You're
yeah,
not in the door.
Hmm.
yes.
Nobody's going to turn on the television and say, I'm going to watch a social worker program.
Hmm.
But when you recognize people of distinction and people of power, that gives you the juice.
Hmm.
But then
Well,
your
but one
people
thing,
then have to follow up
well, I was going to
and
say one
continue
thing
that
though.
relationship at the local level, the county level, and at the state level.
Hmm.
But collaboration is absolutely essential.
This is a
Marla,
great,
before we read the question,
okay.
here, this is from Dr. Judith Crocker, who comes to all of the essential chats. This is a phenomenal conversation. Is there anything either of you educators do not want us professors to teach at our students at either PWI or HBCUs? Now, I'm going to take a stab at this because I just talked to that, and then I'm going to ask each of you. I believe that social workers need to be on debate teams. We
Mm,
don't know how to debate, right? And we don't know how to facilitate difficult conversations. We often get flustered, get quiet. So I keep, I served on a debate team. I know you just picked out of the hat what side you had to be on, and then you stood up there and you did that. What do you think about the curriculum? See, so I started with a living presentation, and I believe in a living curriculum as well, Marla. What happens when you see that the Voting Rights Act was not passed? Do you just teach whatever was on your course outline, or do you talk about the impact, ripped from the
so
headlines,
I,
right?
I am the professor that rips from the headlines. I'm
Okay.
the one that throws the books out the window. And as a matter of fact, when Ukraine, when all of this happened, and I changed the class around to talk about that, and for students to talk about how social workers could be, how we can make a difference, in that war. Students, the reaction that I got afterwards, because I do weekly reactions after class, they write up what they thought. So many students said, "You are the only professor that would even talk about this," that the rest of them didn't even acknowledge that. And I think it's necessary that we talk about what's happening in the world today,
Mhm.
because every day there is nothing that is happening in the world that we cannot bring into the classroom, and the
Mhm.
students are living it. So
Exactly.
So what do I want them not to talk about? I want them to not talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in some theme of the day kind of stuff. I'm
Mhm.
sick of the fact that all of a sudden it has become a focal point when in fact that's at the center of our profession from its inception. The
Exactly.
fact that our academic settings have been teaching from a very Eurocentric perspective and very oppressive one doesn't, they need to stop doing that. I don't need for you to to do anything extra, but just stop treating um, white male theories and perspectives as if they are the norm.
Mhm.
I just want us to live our values as social workers. I want us to be inclusive. I don't want us to just teach about it in some kind of generic way. And when I hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, the fact that you link them all together even bothers me.
Mhm. Yeah, because I say right now, I've seen some African Americans and people of brown and black people really appointed in social work to schools of social work, and I always say, okay, so now a lot of these individuals are the post George Floyd hires, and
Mhm,
now we have to support them as they raise their voice to change the curriculum. Because
mhm,
too often, what happens in social work is that we'll hire somebody and then just say, well, they didn't work out, right? We gave them a chance, but they didn't work out. Not to maintain the status quo, but to actually change things. So I agree
mhm.
with you.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I wanted to get back to what you were saying before about the debate team.
mhm,
One of my assignments in one of my classes is that the students learn how to do a 2-minute pitch
mhm,
a person in a position of power, right?
mhm,
I want them to be able to articulate an argument and present the facts as well as their recommended solutions in 2 minutes. And I
mhm,
give them, I said, I want you to do a 30-second pitch, a 1-minute pitch, a 2-minute pitch, and a 5-minute pitch. But I want you to be able to do it. So if you catch somebody in the elevator, can you ask for that thing that you want to see
mhm,
happen? And if you get an audience with a staff member, can you do a presentation in 5 or 10 minutes? So trying to get us in a position where we know how to really make things happen, I
mhm,
think is and we can learn that skill because advocacy and activism and organizing and educating requires communicating.
mhm.
We need to know how to communicate to people in a way that's passionate, interesting, and fun. They
Right.
should want they should want us to come back. They
Right.
should want to see us again.
Social
You know?
workers have a lot of drop the mic moments, right? You end and you drop the mic, and everybody's like, "Oh, right." That's what we do. Persuasive communication is one of our greatest skills. Ted, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. I think that that elevator speech is most important because some people are very important, and you're not going to get a great deal of time with them.
Mhm,
So when you catch them on the spot, you got to be able to deliver a very clear message
Mhm.
that
mhm,
makes them want to get back to you
mhm,
because of what you had to say. And so often we use too many words to just say, I want help.
Mhm.
So we've got to be able to shorten that message and to make it powerful enough for that one person that can make a difference to understand what you're talking about.
mhm,
So Pamela Scott wants to know, and of course, I could always probably answer this for you as far as yes. The answer is yes. Have you
mhm.
ever felt oppressed by an agency where you were employed? I how did so I'm going to say, how did you manage to deal with oppression when you realized what was happening? Right.
I think dad has the best stories because I was sitting there looking like a little girl scared to death, thinking my dad done lost his job, but
Right.
he he has. I mean, my story is short and sweet. I found out that once I was promoted to a certain position, that it was $25,000 less than my predecessor, who was a white male, and I just went right in there and said, I don't understand this salary.
Hmm.
I challenged it and with facts, and it just went up up until finally got to the top, and within 24 hours they came back with the right offer. So,
Mhm.
how do I deal with being oppressed? I challenge it,
Mhm.
but I also know my facts, and I also know what I bring, and I'm also willing, like Dad said, to leave
Mhm.
because I know my value.
Right. Right.
But Dad, why don't you tell them a little story about you and one of your many superintendents? Dad was always challenging systems.
Well, I mean, I, I had a very unique job because there were so many different things that other people couldn't do. Like I
Mhm.
could organize parents, people couldn't do that. I could write grants, people couldn't do that. I could be in charge of special education, people couldn't do that. So by having a different set of skills,
Mhm.
every time somebody would come after me, I would beat them basically on just facts. If this is what you want, this is what I can deliver. Is there anybody else that can deliver it? Or they would come to me because it was something that they couldn't do. But I would always say, let me have a day to think about doing it. And I would process it and figure out a way to get it done. So it's important when you are being oppressed, you need to also make life difficult for the oppressor. You
Mhm.
see, I had a very strong parent group that was always in back of me. All of the staff that worked for me were always in back of me because I was there for them.
Mhm.
Don't expect to be a boss and disappear when one of your employees is having a difficult time. But you need to be upfront. You need to say, if there's a problem, tell me early so I might be able to help you. But don't
Mhm.
tell me when everybody else knows. And a lot of times, people that are in trouble tell the boss or whoever is in a position to help at the last moment. It's almost impossible to help somebody at the last moment. By letting your boss know early, he or she can prepare. And I was very fortunate enough to have good people around me, but I also was fortunate enough to have people that were above me,
Mhm.
that were forward thinking, that knew the value of having a person with a different skill set. I worked in education, but I was politically connected. I always had a stick. Don't get into a fight if you plan to lose. If you plan to lose, don't show up.
Right.
There you go.
And what both of you had was also the ability to be trans. I mean, I think Ted talked about this earlier about truth. You
Mhm.
remember when you're saying the truth, you remember it. You can't remember a lie.
No.
And also standing up for principle, right? I think it gets frustrating for some individuals who are so afraid to take and challenge someone who would be afraid, Marla, to go into that office and say, "Well, wait a minute, why did they get that?" Right? The beauty of social work is it teaches you the strength to advocate not only for others but for yourself. If you can't advocate for yourself, how are you going to advocate for others whose voice are rarely heard? So
Mhm.
I do know that one time I was teaching and we had a search and the search committee violated the rules. So I aborted the search. And then the search committee wanted to oust me because they were saying I wouldn't follow their plan. And I was like, oh, hell to the no. I was like, oh, no. I went to the provost office and said, oh, no, they won't. Right. And eventually everyone came around. We had to do mediation because people use that thing. I'm a very passionate person. So, I'm going to talk and get animated. Well, we're afraid of her, right? People will bring up some of those things like, oh, we're afraid that. And I was like, but that's we know. I've talked to you like that for years, and we could go out and have a hot dog. But the reality is, I stayed longer than I was prepared to stay until you are not going to force me out when you violated the affirmative action rules, right? When you do that, I believe in affirmative action and I'm going to follow that, and you did that. And so you have to have that ability. And I know when I retired one place, my dean said the one thing that I have to say about Mitt, she's persistent. And I took it as a compliment. I said,
Mhm.
I know you mean, I don't know what you
Mhm.
mean, but I know that I am persistent. I'm going to keep coming back. Like, why? Why do you want me to do that now? Yeah, we just need to make a really nice everybody that had that kumbaya. Why? They violated the rules. You know what? I have no problem with anybody, but I'm not going to allow you to violate the rules. And
Right.
so I think that that's important to have that ability and that courage to be able to stand up. And if anything, I love to give to social work students and practitioners and whatever, like when you bring it here, I'll help you,
Hmm.
but don't walk out of the room. Don't
Right.
walk out of the room, because I was also taught that principle. Never take a job unless you know that you're going to leave a job when it
Yeah.
violates your rules.
Right.
When it violates, be able to walk out. You'll find another job. So now I did see another question from: where does your daily inspiration come from? Red Watson wants: where does your daily inspiration come? Well, I you get it from dad. It's all you have to do. Every time the
Yeah.
other day I
I
was in
mean,
the right, they were in the car and they were getting something, and there's dad sitting there. I mean, your daily inspiration is having such a very. I mean, I am inspired by your dad.
yeah, I get it from two F's: family and faith.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think about I when I'm in search of inspiration, I think about my grandmothers, both of them very strong-willed women. That my grandma Blunt, who raised four kids by herself, and she was a nurse, and all of them went on to do great things. And then my other grandmother, who was a foreman at a ball bearing plant with a bunch of men, and a union organizer, and just a very strong woman. So I get inspired by like my ancestors, and my mom and my sisters. They inspire me when I look at my sister, both of them doing great work. And of course, you guys can tell I want to be just like my dad, so I'm inspired by him. But but for me, it's my faith. And going back to one of the questions about, how do you stay, like, how do you deal with oppression and work with those that are being oppressed? It's the same answer. It's my faith. That I rely on my belief that I'm not doing this by myself, and I'm also not doing it for me or even for the person that I'm working with. I'm doing it for something greater,
Mm-hmm.
and that keeps me going. It actually motivates me and inspires me, to want to be like those that I study.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's my faith, and my faith is not just Christian. I study multiple faiths because I just want to learn. I want to learn how to be the best person that I can be. So mine is my faith and my family.
How
Dad?
about you, Ted?
I think the thing that stands out to me is like being right only means you're right. It doesn't mean you're winning. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, because we don't win when we're right, we either want to give up or do something differently. When in essence, we can prepare and go back to make sure that we can win. But just being right doesn't
Doesn't
mean you
make
win. It just
being
means
right. Yeah.
you're right.
I'm gonna remember that one. I have to write that one down. Being right doesn't mean you. For me, my inspiration is my two grandsons, who are now 9 and 7. And my grandson was here the other day, and he was saying something about the word urban. And he said, because he lives in Washington D.C. He said, I live in the urban community, and I'm like, yeah. And he said, when I say urban, and people, if I tell people that, most people think that that we carry guns and that they need to be afraid of people from the urban community. He said, I don't carry guns, I don't like guns. And it just shook, because I never thought, how you kids that out of the mouths of babes. And I said, well, where I live. He said, are you kidding? This is the suburbs. When people say suburbs, they think of people who have everything. But he said, when people say urban, and I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And he said, I don't know, because I'm not old enough yet, but we've got to change that. And I started looking at how words do, because even in social work, oh, they're from the urban communities, and if you look at your own implicit bias, you
Mhm.
begin to think of somebody, when people who live in cities have the diversity of a greatness as the same as the suburbs. So my
Mhm.
young people are my inspirations, because I want to build a world. I didn't have boys like you,
Mm.
Ted. I had all girls. And now I have these two boys, and I do worry about the day that they hop in a car in Washington, D.C. and drive to Westchester, Pennsylvania. I want them to be safe. So I do this work for them.
Mhm.
One thing that we had, I thought there was a question about Ted, when
Mhm.
Marla came to you and said, I'm going to be a social worker. What did you think?
Say what?
Right, right. Okay.
Well, I mean, just the mere fact that that was something that she wanted to do pleased me without me advocating for it. So often parents tend to advocate to their kids what they want them to do and be. And I've never suggested what my children should do
Mhm.
or be. And for her to want to do that, that made me extremely proud, because I knew that whatever she wanted to do, she would put her heart into it and her soul into it. And it was all about service, and it was never about her. And so
Yeah.
often we tend to get these jobs because it's about the money, and it's not about the service to those that might need it the most. So it was a pleasure for me to hear that, both from Marla and also from my granddaughter, Alyssa.
Mhm.
The mere fact that they thought social worker or being a social worker would be a good option for them. And then for them both to decide to go to Rutgers University. I mean, when I went to Rutgers, I mean, it was at a time when I think you could count the number of Black people on one hand. So it was so early in the game. And at that particular time, a lot of Black folks really weren't considering social work as much as they were considering education,
Mhm.
because it was a lot easier to get into education. They normally had education degrees. The options weren't that many. So for Marla and for Alyssa, both to go to Winston-Salem, which both made me really proud, and for both to decide to be social workers made me extremely proud. And I'm just glad that Marla every now and then is a nice person, but that's only one day a week.
And Marla, I saw the question there about your children, and I know Marla. Marla just came through
Mm.
one of the most arduous years. Her daughter only applied to one school. It wasn't for social work,
Mm.
but Marla was supportive. And go
But
ahead,
guess
Marla.
what?
Go ahead. All right. So you tell the story.
But no, what I was going to say is the school where she's going was the first school to hold social work classes, and that is
Mhm.
Columbia University in
Mhm.
1898.
Mhm.
So yeah, I forgot to mention that, and this ties back to two of the questions that you asked about faith, about inspiration. My kids are my world,
Mhm.
and you know, you're right, we do this work because of the world that we want to leave for them.
Mhm.
But I went through many pregnancy losses in order to be blessed with the two children that I have today.
Mm.
And and they know how special they are to me.
Mhm.
Um and it is because of the next generation
Mhm.
that dad did what he did, that you did what you did, and why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's
Right.
because of
Right.
them. We're not
Yeah.
gonna see it. We're not gonna see it. And I don't care to see it. I just want to
Mhm.
plant the seeds. I just want to crack, the foundation. I want to shake up the system so that
Mhm.
somebody behind me can now pull it apart, and then somebody after them can tear it down and build it back up. All I need to do is see the crack.
Right. Right.
That's all I
Yeah.
need.
Yeah, I have 3 daughters. None of them pursued social work. because they said I brought them to school all the time because I used to have to file. They would have to file my books and all of those kind of things. But in looking at that, I have one who is a clinical psychologist. I often told her we could open up a joint practice because she could sit there and talk about life and why you are the way you are, and I can sit there and help people navigate what they need to have to do. But part of her dedication is to children, to make sure that children have the ability to express themselves. Even with my grandsons, sometimes we were raised to be quiet. They were raised to express. My other daughter is a HR specialist, and I tell you, her commitment to diversity of saying, "Oh no, we're not going to do this." She runs a dental practice, makes sure it's inclusive, make sure she has dental hygienists that are Latino in Atlanta. Just the whole thing of having a different type of vibe. And then my youngest is a lawyer, probably followed more in her dad's footsteps, but more of an advocate, right? The thing is, I don't care what they are extensions of ourselves. I hear social work in all of what they do. The funny story that I will end with is that my daughters were the one in DC. The homeless people were sitting there, and I kept saying, Jennifer, why are you running out? We would give her money once a month. Why? What happened to your money? She said, you told us to give to people. So there's a homeless person I give to. I'm like, but you don't have no money to give to people, right? I mean, these values she said, you told us to always give to people who had, when we had more. And so I just gave to it, right? So we have to look at sometimes our thing. In closing, because I told you this time would go
Yes.
very really fast, but I thank you. I wish you all a happy social work day. But I'm going to ask each of you, not so much for your words of wisdom or whatever. I'm just going to ask you to speak to the audience about what you want them to know for to being a social worker in 2022. I have to say, this is the most horrific time in our nation and around the globe. Everybody, I don't care where they are, has been affected by COVID globally. The mental health crisis of America and around the globe has been impacted. We have children, and we know that the uptick in children's suicide is as high as it's ever been. We know that military suicide is high as it's ever been. Every time you turn on the nightly news, gun violence is taking so many people away. We need competent, qualified social workers who will go into those communities. So, what would you say to keep people's hope alive?
Mm. Dad, did you want to go first or?
I mean, that's a tough question. I think it's sort of like some words of wisdom. And the words that come to my mind are, you are what you see unless you see what you want to become. One is sight and the other is vision. Sight is when your eyes are open. Vision is when your eyes are closed.
Mm, wow,
Okay.
these pearls of wisdom.
So I would say that to social workers out here in the world that we're living in today, that like the slogan is for this year, the time is right. That we as a profession were made for a time such as this. That who we are, what our core values say, we are equipped to really contribute to the solutions that are needed. And I believe if we stay unified, if we come together um, as a collective body of individuals, 700,000, 800,000 social workers, we can make a difference. So I would say get involved, get engaged, and stay hopeful. because hope is really sometimes all that we have.
Exactly. I want to take this opportunity to thank both of you because I call on Marla to do so many things, and she's always there. Uh, so I want to thank you, and I want to thank her dad for joining. I think both of them need to be social work pioneers. I'm going to keep pushing that agenda because they've done so much. I want to tell the listening audience that I saw a name come across, and that was Dr. Wilma Peoples Wilkins, who was one of the first African American deans up at Boston University. So I thank you for joining us today because she herself is an icon and one to be studied. And I know the so many doors that she opened for so many individuals in the city of Boston, which years ago was not as receptive to people of color. So thank you, Dr. Peoples Wilkins, for joining us. I want to say to you, the listening audience, there's another opportunity on March the 29th to get two CEs that will be complimentary because we are going to honor the Indigenous journey. As you know, I serve as president of the International Federation of Social Workers for the North America region, and I represent the North America region around the globe. We talked about Canada and the United States are the two regions, and we realized the massacre that we did of indigenous people. There were at least 493 different tribes that were here and living in peaceful coexistence. I talked about the Lenape Indian. They were here 10,000 years before the European settlers. And now many of them, their history is lost, been stolen, and strayed. So we want to honor the indigenous journey and talk about what the role of social work is. So please join us. And I also have to say this. This was organized by an NASW intern, Ms. Carissa Proctor from Howard University, who's an MSW candidate, and she works with the president of NASW. And if you know anything about me, I'll give you a project and I let you go. I am not one that's going to say, do this, do that, do that. And she has done a phenomenal job. So we're also going to honor Carissa for carrying this out, this vision. This is a great chat. So just know that we're going to have our indigenous journey, and then we're also going to talk about what do all of those acronyms mean? LGBTQIA plus, because I found too many people who just don't know what the acronyms. We social work use acronyms. I don't like BIPOC. I don't like all of these things. So we're going to bring someone that's going to break it down to help you know pronouns, when to use, if to use, those kind of things. But then we're going to do our last series with looking at the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, the hate that is growing, that is silent. As we know, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, their value is losing face. So they don't really ever talk about what's going on in their community. And we're going to talk about that in social work. And then I'm going to wrap it up for June because this year, I am going to have my summer. We're going to wrap it up in June because you never know what's going to happen in July and August and where we're going to be. I need my summer this year, NASW. But in June, we're going to do something really different where we're going to be bringing people together. We have allies. When we look at the demographics of social work, the majority of social workers are our white allies. And I need them to be in the room. We wear this human stain: racism, sexism, elitism, ageism, homophobic, Islamophobic, all of those isms, right? If we all band together, think of the power that we could
Mhm.
have, right? So many people try to do red states, blue states. Forget that. Let's look at where we are. So I want to have, because the last series of chaps next year is going to be having real hard conversations, because I know we talk about being an anti-racist, as Marla said. We talked about all of these words: diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've been doing that for generations. It's in the code of ethics, and we changed the language, just as the language of African Americans have changed and all the evolutions and the LGBTQI. But we do know that this human stain that we have in America, and I'm going to call it out, our previous president brought in a lot of hate in America. And social work, we've got to make sure that we go into our communities, our rural areas, every area, and explain to people that it's not people against people, that we cannot afford to slip and become like what's happening in Ukraine. One person deciding the power. We all believe in democracy. And so we're going to have those conversations. So I want to thank you all. Thank all the guests for joining us today. Have a happy social work month. Do one thing for me: take your hand, raise it in the air, and pat yourself on the back. Because very rarely will you see social workers pat themselves on the back. Be proud of yourself. You've always been at the front line. You do jobs that nobody else wants to do. When the news trucks go away from all of the tornadoes and the floods and all of the pain and suffering across the globe, who's still there holding sometimes? A social worker. So thank you. And bye, everybody.